This is part 4 of WCF video series. In this video, we'll discuss how a single WCF service can implement multiple service contracts and then expose each of those service contracts using a different endpoint. This is continuation to part 3, so I strongly recommend watching part 3 before proceeding with this video. Let's understand how a WCF service can implement multiple service contracts with an example. Let's flip to Visual Studio. Let's create a new class library project. And let's call this company service. Let's delete this class1.cs file that is auto-generated. And to this project, let's add a WCF service. Search for WCF. And then let's name this service company service. So this has generated two files, that is iCompanyService.cs and companyservice.cs. Within this iCompanyService.cs file, at the moment, we only have one service contract. Notice that this interface is decorated with service contract attribute, so this is a service contract. Let's change the name of this service contract to iCompany public service. And then let's also change the name of this operation contract here. Let's actually change the name of the method to get public information. And let's change the return type of this method to string. So this method is going to return a string. At the moment, this has got only one service contract. Let's make a copy of this. And then let's change the name here from iCompany public service to iCompany confidential service. And let's change this method name here to get confidential information. Okay, at the moment we have got two service contracts. Basically the idea is we want this company public service to be available for everyone, that is outside the firewall and to the employees within the firewall. Everybody will be able to access this because this service has got this get public information, which is public information and will be available to everyone. Whereas this one is a confidential service. We want this to be available only for the employees of the company behind the firewall. Okay, so we're going to expose this service using HTTP protocol, so HTTP can go through the firewall. So this will be accessible to everybody, but this one will be available over TCP protocol, that is only behind the firewall. Okay, so at the moment we got two service contracts. Now let's look at our service class itself. Now here we have an error. That's basically because we have changed the names of the interfaces there. So we want this class to implement both of the service contracts, that is iCompany public service contract as well as iCompany confidential service contract. Now we need to provide the implementations for those service contract methods, and to do that simply click on this option, implement interface iCompany public service, and then similarly let's implement the confidential service methods. Okay, so all these methods are going to do is return a string. So get public information, this method is going to return this string. Just to speed things up, I have already typed the message that we want to return. So basically all it returns is this is public information and available over HTTP to all general public outside the firewall. And we want this method to return a string which says this is confidential information and only available over TCP behind the company firewall. So pretty simple service. At the moment we have a service implementing multiple service contracts. Okay, so this could be an interview question. Is it possible for a WCF service to implement multiple service contracts? The answer is yes. Okay, all we need to do is make that class implement those two interfaces. That's all. But then how do we want to make them available to the clients? We have to configure two endpoints. One endpoint is going to make this service available. The other endpoint is going to make this service contract available. Okay, let's now look at that. So at the moment we have the service itself ready. Now we need to host this service, and in order to do that, let's use a console application. So to this solution, let's add a console project. and let's call this company service host. Now the first thing that we need to do is add a reference to the company service project itself, as well as the WCF assembly, which is system.service model. So let's go ahead and do that. So first we need the project itself, and we need a reference to system.service model, which is the main WCF assembly. Alright, so now we need to add the application configuration file where we specify the configuration. So add a new item, and we want to add application configuration file. So within this file we are going to specify the configuration for our service, and we discussed this configuration in detail in the previous session of this video series. So if you're new to this configuration information, please watch part 3 from the WCF video series. So here we are going to specify system.service model, and within that we are going to have services element, and within that a service element. And we need to specify our service name. The service name is going to be present in this company service.cs file. So the name of the service is company service, and it's present in company service namespace. So let's copy that and specify the service name. And then the next important thing is to specify the endpoints. So let's go ahead and add an endpoint. An endpoint is going to have three things, that is address, binding, and configuration. So these are called as the ABC of an endpoint. So address, we are going to use relative addresses here. So company service is going to be the address. And then binding, so we want this service, that is the public service, to be available over HTTP protocol. So we are going to make use of basic HTTP binding. And to get the spelling right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use bindings element here, and then here we should get all the bindings. So let's use basic HTTP binding, and then finally we need to specify the contract. Okay, so which service contract do we want to make available over HTTP? This contract, the public contract, I company public service, and that's present within company service namespace. So the name of the contract is I company public service, and the namespace is company service. So the fully qualified name of the contract is going to be company service dot I company public service. So at this point we are done specifying one endpoint. Let's specify the other endpoint. Okay, even for this endpoint the address is going to be company service, and we are going to use net TCP binding here, because we want this service to be available only using TCP protocol, that's behind the firewall only. So we are going to use net TCP binding, and the contract name is going to be I company confidential service, which is again present in the same namespace, that's company service namespace. Alright, now let's specify the base addresses, and to do that we use the host element. We want to specify base addresses, and let's add a base address. Okay, so http://localhost:/port 8080. Okay, so the fully qualified address of this endpoint is going to be http://localhost:/8080/company service. In a similar fashion, let's specify the base address for this company service. So we want this service contract, that is the confidential service contract, to be available over TCP protocol. So that is going to be net.tcp://localhost. Let's change the port number to 8090. Alright, so this service will be available at net.tcp localhost 8090/company service. So the base addresses are different here. So the address, the full address will be different for this endpoint and for this endpoint. Alright, let's get rid of this bindings element there. And the most important thing for the clients to be able to generate that WSDL document, we need to make the metadata of this service available. Now when I say metadata, what we mean by metadata, it's nothing but for the client to build proxy classes, they need to know about what is the service contract itself, what operations are available, the names of the operations, what parameters they take in, what are their data types, similarly what type of data is returned back. Without this information, clients will not be able to construct proxy classes. Okay, so in order for that metadata, which is going to be sent using the WSDL document, to be made available, we need to specify service behaviors. Okay, so let's go ahead and specify the service behavior. And to do that, we use behaviors element. And within behaviors, we want to specify service behaviors. And we want to add a behavior. So let's specify a behavior. Let's call it max behavior. And within this, we want service metadata. And we want clients to be able to browse to the metadata file, that is the WSDL file of our service. So we are saying HTTP get enabled equals true. So they're going to use HTTP protocol, so they issue a GET request, and that's why HTTP get enabled equals true. And the final one thing that we need to do is associate the service with this behavior, and in order to do that, we use behavior configuration and specify the name of this behavior there. So pretty straightforward. Alright, so let's go ahead and build our solution. Now we need to set our company service host as the startup project. So let's set that as the startup project. And one more important thing that we need to do is, when this program loads, we want to construct our service host and then start the host. And in order to do that, the service host class is present in system.service_model_assembly. So let's go ahead and bring that namespace in, and then let's use this using block so that we don't have to close the host explicitly. So using service host, and let's call it host equals new service host, and obviously we need to specify the type of the service. What is the type of our service? Company service, and that's present in company service namespace. And in order to get the type of a service, we use the type of keyword. So company service dot company service. So we want to open the host, and let's also print the date and time the host has started. So console.writeLine host started at, let's say, datetime.now. And then in order for this console application to be alive without closing automatically, let's use console.writeLine. Alright, we are done. Let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so host has started. Now all we need to do is create a client application. So let's open another instance of Visual Studio, and then let's create a new ASP.NET application. So new project. Let's select web, and let's create an empty web application, and let's call this company client. So this client should be able to consume our service. And the first thing that we need to do is obviously add a reference to the service. And in order to do that, select add service reference option, and within this address box we need to give the address where the WSDL document will be available. That will be at localhost:8080, and click go button. So that's the port number we have specified. So look at that, we have got company service there, and look at both of the service contracts are available here. iCompany confidential service, we have got get confidential information, and iCompany public service, get public information. Both of them are available. So let's add a meaningful namespace. Let's call this company service. Click OK. So a WSDL document should be generated. A proxy class based on the WSDL document should be generated for us. So now to this project, let's add a web form. And to speed things up, I've typed the HTML already. So let me copy this HTML and paste it here. And then once I flip this to the design mode, you will understand. So basically I have a table here. Within that I have two buttons, get public information and get confidential information, and two label controls basically to display the message that we get back. So let's double click on this button to generate the click event handler. So that is get public information button. So what we need to do here, create an instance of the company service proxy classes. So within the company service namespace, we have got, look at this, we have got both the clients, that is company public service client and company confidential service client. Okay, so let's go ahead and create an instance of company public service client. Let's call this client equals new company public service client. Now if you remember, we have made this service contract available only over HTTP protocol. Okay, so we need to use that endpoint in order to communicate with this service. Now when we added a reference to this service, it has obviously generated lot of configuration for us. And within this configuration, look at this, both the endpoints that we have specified within the service are available here. Okay, look at this, we have the endpoint which uses HTTP protocol, and the name of that endpoint is here. So with public service, we want to use this endpoint. Okay, so within our code behind file, within the constructor, let's specify the name of the endpoint, and then simply invoke the method. Look at this, when I say client dot, we should say get public information method, which is returning a string, and all we want to do is we want to display that within the label control. So label1.text equals that. Okay, in a similar fashion, when we click this button, get confidential information, we want to create an instance of confidential service client class. Let's call this client equals new company confidential service client. Again, we need to specify the name of the endpoint that we want to use. This confidential service client is going to be available on TCP protocol. So here we have the TCP protocol. Look at that, look at the address we have here. It's the fully qualified address. If you remember, within the service we have specified relative address as company service, and within the base address we have specified this one. So the client now knows the fully qualified address to hit that endpoint. So basically this is the name of this endpoint. So let's copy that and specify it here. And then client dot, we should see that confidential information method there, and we want to display that within label 2 control. Alright, so with all these changes, let's go ahead and run this and see what's going to happen. Now get public information, look at that, this is public information, the message appears as expected. Get confidential information, both of the messages we can see here. Now what was the actual requirement? The actual requirement was this public service to be available outside as well as inside, but this company confidential service should be available only inside the company, that is behind the firewall. But if you look at the client that we have just built, we are able to generate proxy classes of both the services, and we are able to invoke both of the service methods. So how is that possible? That's basically because in my case here, both the service and client are running on the same machine. So basically they are behind the firewall. So I'm able to use both of the endpoints. But then if you are outside the firewall, you will be able to generate the proxy classes, but then when you try to invoke the method, the firewall will block that. So basically you will get an exception at runtime when you invoke the method. Okay, so basically in this video, what did we discuss? We implemented a service, a WCF service, that can have multiple service contracts. So is it possible for a WCF service to implement multiple service contracts? The answer is yes. We make the service class implement multiple service interfaces and then simply expose those service contracts using a different endpoint, as you can see here. Okay, pretty straightforward. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.